Today here in the State House, we're going to spend a few minutes looking at this beautiful portrait of former Governor Madeleine Kunin and talking a little bit about her political career here in Vermont. This portrait was done in 1992 by artist Jan Cook Mack, who had lived in Vermont for some period of time, but actually has for a couple of decades at least now been living in Washington State. Now, Madeleine Kunin was born in Zurich in Switzerland and moved to the United States as a child. She received a bachelor's degree from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. She also has a master's degree from the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, as well as a master's in English from the University of Vermont. And prior to her seeking elective office, she worked as a journalist for the Burlington Free Press, also was a tour guide at the World's Fair, and as a part-time college professor. She was also involved in many community activities, particularly focused on women's rights, children, and literature, which have been subjects that have been near and dear to her heart for her entire life. In 1972, Madeleine Kunin was defeated in her bid to join the Burlington Board of Aldermen. She did not let that dissuade her from public service, though, and later that year she was elected to the Vermont State to be a Vermont State representative here. In her first term, she served as a member of the Government Operations Committee. She was re-elected again in 1974 and was elected Minority Whip and appointed to the Appropriations Committee. And after being elected to a third term in 1976, she was appointed chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, and in so doing was the first woman to assume that position here in the state of Vermont. So another important first there for Vermont women. That wasn't going to be her only important Vermont first, though. In 1978, she was elected to the first of two terms as the lieutenant governor here in Vermont, serving with Republican Governor Richard Snelling. During her time as Lieutenant Governor, she produced various studies in areas such as energy, daycare, and made many policy recommendations to the governor and legislature, and was a frequent speaker around the state in her time as Lieutenant Governor. She chose not to run for re-election as Lieutenant Governor in 1982 and instead challenged Governor Snelling for the governorship. She was unsuccessful. But in 1984, Snelling decided not to run for re-election, and Kunin ultimately was the successful Democratic nominee and defeated Republican John Easton Jr. To win the first of her three terms as governor here in Vermont. And she did serve from 1985 to 1991. In 1986, she ran for her second term as governor and defeated Peter Smith, a Republican, and independent Bernie Sanders, who would go on to quite a lengthy political career himself. Smith received 38% of that vote, and Kunin won with nearly 50%, with just over 40% of the vote. She was the first woman in U.S. history to have been elected to governor of the United States 3 times. And as governor, she focused on, again, a lot of things that were very near and dear to her heart: the environment, education, children and family issues. She appointed the first woman to the Vermont Supreme Court and also created the state's family court system. In 1990, she declined re-election and moved on to kind of the next part of her career. She served as the Deputy Secretary of Education from 1993 to 1997 under President Bill Clinton, and then became the ambassador to her native Switzerland and served in there for a couple years as well. In her post-political career, she's been an avid writer. She has 4 books that have come out: Living a Political Life, Pearls, Politics, and Power, How Women Can Win and Lead, The New Feminist Agenda, Defining the Next Revolution for Women, Work, and Family, and her book that has just come out within the last few months, Coming of Age, My Journey to the 80s. So a very long and decorated political career here in Vermont. She continues to be a great voice for women and pushing for more women to get into politics in the state of Vermont, and someone that we're lucky enough to actually have here in the State House for a Farmers Night this year, and someone that we hope will continue to visit us occasionally in the building here and continue with her great work to push for more women in politics.
Good morning. My name is Teresa Wood, and I'm a state representative, live in Waterbury, and also serve Bolton, Huntington, and Buell's Gore. This morning I'd like to talk to you about that House gave preliminary approval yesterday to a landmark child care bill that's going to help the status of young families who live and work in Vermont, and for the workforce to assist them with tuition and loan repayment, as well as to pay higher rates to our child care providers. And in addition to that, this will definitely help Vermont's economy and local businesses as they struggle to find people to enter their businesses in the workforce. So it passed on a voice vote yesterday with only one dissenter, and we look forward to investing about $10.5 million in this cause over the next year. And I do want to say this is part of a multi-year plan to completely redesign the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. There was no party lines in this discussion or this debate. This was a bill that was worked on across party lines, and is also something that was on the governor's agenda when he gave the budget address. And it has been on the agenda of Democrats for at least the last 3 to 4 years, and we have finally built the momentum to keep it going. Thank you.
Hi, Representative Avram Patt, representing Morristown, Elmore, Woodbury, and Worcester. I am on the Energy and Technology Committee in the House. This week, 2 issues very important to members of the committee and to myself went to the floor of the House. The first one was the broadband bill that we worked on for most of the first half of the session, which passed with, I think, unanimously. It's a package of measures to try to keep working on getting broadband out to the last mile, including to my house in Worcester. Much of Vermont, particularly rural Vermont, as we know, has either no internet access or access to internet that is not considered broadband, is not high speed enough. So hopefully that will get through the Senate more or less the same way we passed it. And the other issue, although we did not have a bill in our committee on this, was increasing funding for the low-income weatherization program by increasing one of the existing taxes that goes into the weatherization fund, and that is a tax on bulk on deliverable fuels. Will go up 2 cents to 4 cents, which for an average homeowner using one of those fuels would mean about $15 a year. So while that is money out of people's pockets, it's also not a huge amount, and it goes to a proven program that, since it got state funding in 1990, has been showing through analysis a very positive cost-benefit. Saves people on average 29% on their energy bills, and in more recent years is also, as we get more and more concerned about climate change, is in the non-transportation area, is the single easiest and most ready-to-go way of reducing fossil fuel use in thermal use. The program works. The structures in state government and at the local agencies that run it are there, and this simply gives them more resources to do more houses and to cut down on the enormous and very long waiting lists for this program. So that's we spent a lot of time on 2 issues that I've been working on in committee and outside of committee, and that I'm very pleased seem to be moving along. Okay. Thank you.
Good day, Mr. and Mrs. Vermonter and all the canoes on the Winooski. I'm Joe Benning. I represent the Caledonia County District. I also serve as the minority leader in the Senate. I serve on 2 committees. One is Judiciary, and I chair Institutions. We'll talk a little bit about guns first. We went through a very long week with the gun question. We have a bill that tries to clean up some language from last year's gun debate that we had, making a few mistakes along the way, one of which was something that I ran into. Prior to this year, I had never owned a weapon before. And as it happens, my brother-in-law showed up on Thanksgiving Day asking if I would like to have a gun that belonged to his father. It's an antique, and probably will never be fired, but the bottom line is he could not hand it to me on Thanksgiving Day because I was his brother-in-law, and I did not fall under the exception of people who could have a weapon transferred to them without having a background check. And of course, it being Thanksgiving Day, there was no way we were going to find any place to have that done. However, as he was standing there trying to give it to me, and I had to tell him that he could not, he could give it to his sister, my wife, and she in turn could actually give the weapon to me, perfectly legal. That's what happened. I now own an antique Savage shotgun, and it will proudly hang on our wall in memory of my wife's father. We cleaned up that a little bit in the bill that we just passed. There is now a 24-hour waiting period in this bill that has come out of the Senate. It has not yet been dealt with in the House, but we anticipate that will be happening shortly. One other thing I would talk about, we have a question of the abortion situation coming down the pike. There is a bill in the House, or that came back to us from the House, that calls for a complete control of the situation by the woman who happens to be pregnant. There is also at the same time a proposed constitutional amendment that has been placed in the Health and Welfare Committee in the Senate, and that constitutional amendment is about to come up for discussion on the floor of the Senate. It calls for a woman to be able to have the right to have control over her own body, subject to a compelling state interest. That constitutional amendment actually preserves a balancing test in Roe v. Wade. The bill that accompanies it does not. The bill essentially wipes out the balancing test altogether. So from my perspective, I'm more in favor of the constitutional amendment than I am the bill itself. The other thing that we could probably talk a little bit about is it's getting pretty hectic on the floor of the Senate. There's a whole lot of things that are going on, and we are very busy. Hopefully we'll get through the next couple of weeks and things will settle out a little bit, but as time goes by, as always, if you happen to have questions or comments, don't hesitate to let us know. We cannot possibly answer all the communications that we get, but we do our best to try to reach people who really need to have a conversation. So thank you very much for the time, and have a great day.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian Smith. I'm the state rep from Orleans 1, which includes the towns of Derby, Morgan, Charleston, Holland, and Brownington. I've got a few bills I'd like to talk about. Primarily, the first one is out of my committee on health care, House Bill 524. We had a lot of discussion. It's a 30-page bill, and I was the lone nay vote on it last week. And it went to Ways and Means. I voted no on this bill for one reason and one reason only. The fact that there was a fine included in the mandate that took money out of Vermonters' pockets. I'll never do that as long as I'm sitting under this golden dome, is vote to take money out of a Vermonter's pocket. The bill went to Ways and Means. Ways and Means eliminated, they kept the mandate in the bill, but they eliminated the fine. That's been talked about. It's going to be talked about this afternoon, I believe. And I think without the fine in there, in the mandate, I will support the bill. The rest of the bill is a pretty good bill. It's going to look out for everybody in Vermont as far as health care goes. The other bill that I wanted to talk briefly on was H439. It's the Home Weatherization Assistance Program. Weatherization, I was in General Affairs for my first term. And the weatherization bill, it's a great project. They do a lot for a lot of middle to low-income Vermonters, primarily low-income Vermonters. I totally would support that project. However, there are a few small taxes included in what I would call fossil fuels, including diesel, propane, kerosene. It's a bill that it's a carbon tax in disguise, I believe. There's no mention of a carbon tax being introduced this year, so we're looking at a lot of little tiny taxes, and I believe that's what this is. I won't support that. I would, however, support the weatherization program. The last bill that I can talk about briefly is H531. It's the Vermont Child Care and Early Learning System. The one reason this bill concerns me is I happened to have a constituent call me 3 or 4 days ago addressing the issue of a 10-month-old child that had a 4-star child care provider, not registered with the state. The state told them that they had to lower their amount of people, children in the child care, so they lost their opportunity. They can't afford and they can't find another one. This bill will assist them once it's passed, if it's passed. It will assist them in being able to afford child care so the mother and the father can both continue to work. They're young Vermonters that want to stay here in Vermont, and I sincerely hope that House Bill 531 is fully supported. Those are my 3 bills that I'm concerned about. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak under the Golden Dome.
Hi, this is Representative Tommy Waltz from Berry City. I'm on the General Housing Military Affairs Committee, which is kind of an unusual committee. Housing is pretty clear. We deal with any issues having to do with housing throughout the state. Military affairs means we deal with military affairs in the state. And you might wonder about that since we don't have any active duty military in Vermont, except for a few Coast Guard personnel. So we deal mostly with the Vermont National Guard, anything concerning them. And our committee also deals with the Vermont Veterans Home down in Bennington. That's one of our big issues that we try to take care of every year to make sure our veterans are getting the treatment they deserve and that they need. Right now, our committee is, and the general part of our name means we deal with anything that no other committee has. So, for example, liquor and lottery come to our committee. The question of Indigenous Peoples Day, replacing Columbus Day, comes to our committee, since that doesn't fit anywhere else. And so we deal with all kinds of miscellaneous issues like that. What we're dealing with now, what is coming before our committee now, paid family leave, which is a huge issue, and we continue talking about this morning. The minimum wage will also be coming to our committee, since we deal with those sorts of issues and labor issues as well. Here on the House itself, some of you might be aware, we spent a pretty long day yesterday. We went from 10 o'clock in the morning till just before 7 o'clock at night yesterday, talking about various issues. And they run from banning certain kinds of pesticides, qualification for a public defender, weatherization for low-income homes, getting broadband deployed throughout the entire state of Vermont, certain fees that town clerks can charge for the record keeping that they have to do, a workforce development and education finance. So you can see that's a wide range of activities, and this is pretty typical for this time of year after crossover, when basically bills have to have been voted out of committee to go from the House to the Senate and the other way around from the Senate to the House. And now we're dealing with the many hundreds of bills that have gone through that process, and it's a long slog. And so I would encourage you to keep track. You can always check on the legislative website to see where a particular bill is, what's been happening to it. And I would encourage you to contact your senator or your representative if you want to share an opinion or you have a question. Good to see you all.
Hi, I'm Representative Ann Pugh from South Burlington, and I chair the House Human Services Committee. And I'm going to take my time today to talk about a child care and early learning bill that passed out of my committee 11-0 and has passed the House. One of the reasons I want to talk about it first is the process we took. So much of what you hear and read about the legislature is how we are fighting, how Democrats don't talk to progressives, progressives don't talk to Republicans, and independents don't talk to anyone. I'm being a little sarcastic, but you hear things around that we fight all the time and that it's all contentious. Well, this bill we had 6 bills related to child care on our wall. We took them all down. We looked at them all. We took testimony from child care providers, from people in the Agency of Human Services, for people who need child care, for people who've done research about the importance of child care, not only for giving young Vermonters a healthy start, but also for their families and for employers who will have employees now who are not worried about where their kids are. And we did this as a committee, and we had 4 people report the bill, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, and it was a wonderful experience of 11 people really working as a team to get to the finish line. And the finish line is Vermont's future, is ensuring that how we treat children is good, and that they're safe, and that families have access to quality child care. And I'm just going to end with a quote from Carl Menninger. How a society treats its children is a measure of their good. So thank you very much.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Scott Beck, a representative from St. Johnsbury, and I'm on the House Ways and Means Committee. Taxes this week are front and center. You may have heard that last night the House voted to increase the fuel tax that we charge on carbon heating fuels in the state of Vermont. Go from 2 cents to 4 cents, and so what that means for a Vermonter is that instead of paying $4 in tax on a 200-gallon delivery, they'd pay $8 on a 200-gallon delivery. Certainly, I'm not supportive of that, and there were 60 other people in the House that agreed with me on that point. But unfortunately, the way democracy works is the majority rules, and there were 80 people that thought that Vermonters could afford more money, more taxes being taken out on their heating needs. Those funds will go to the weatherization fund, like they always have, to help people weatherize their homes. The other tax, it will be the revenue bill, which has all other taxes in the state. That will be on the floor tomorrow. And there's nothing really terribly remarkable about it, except for some movement of taxes in a revenue-neutral way to hopefully generate some economic activity in the state. And one of them is the near elimination, not full elimination, but near elimination of the land gains use tax, which really deters a lot of economic development in the state, a lot of economic activity. And we're hoping that if we can remove that tax or almost fully remove it, that will create a more vibrant economy. And it's only a tax that generates $1.2 million, so it's a relatively low-risk way to see if we can generate some economic activity in the state. Thank you.
Yes, this is Martin LaLonde. I'm a representative from South Burlington, one of the 4 representatives from South Burlington, and I'm in my 3rd term, and I'm on the Judiciary Committee. And today we've started taking testimony regarding a bill that we've received from the Senate, S-169, which has to do with certain gun restrictions. In that bill, it relaxes, in fact, some of the restrictions with respect to use of high-capacity magazines for shooting contests, particularly. But it also has a 24-hour waiting period for purchases of handguns. So once a background check is successfully completed, there'd be an additional 24-hour cooling off period, because a lot of purchases of handguns that lead to harm to oneself or others is often based on really impulsive behavior. So this is a cooling off period. We believe it would certainly help. We are looking at that bill very closely and taking testimony, evaluating whether there should be a longer waiting period or if this is a sufficient waiting period, given some other concerns with respect to gun shows and whether a longer waiting period would undermine certain gun shows that we have in Vermont. Also whether the waiting period should extend to all firearms. So these are questions we're looking at. I'm sure there are other ideas out there that might be lobbed our way, such as safe storage and such, but we're really trying to stick closely with what the Senate has done, and we'll be looking at that over the next couple weeks. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Representative Jim Maslin from Thetford. Today the House passed H. 439, a very significant bill to provide increased funding for weatherization. The bill raises something called the fuel tax from 4 pennies per gallon, from 2 pennies per gallon to 4 pennies per gallon. We need to make the distinction between a fuel tax and a gas tax. This is not a gas tax on gasoline that you purchase to drive your car hither and yon. It is on fuel, meaning home heating fuel, propane, natural gas, and in some instances, coal. The money goes to the Vermont Office of Economic Opportunity, and from there it is spread out to the CAP agencies, Community Action Program agencies, who, under an existing program with an existing infrastructure, weather-wise low-income homes. These are homes where the household income is no more than 80% of county median income. In many cases, these are the oldest homes in the state. They leak energy like sieves. Trailers are eligible, and we found that the increased cost of this 2-cent increase on the fuel is about $15 per household on average. An existing home gets weatherized by a crew experienced to do the job. It costs about $8,500 on average to do a home, but low-income homeowners who participate then save about $500 a year, as much as, on home heating fuel costs, and the energy savings on average is about 29.2%. That's very significant. While this is not a carbon tax bill, it does reduce greenhouse emissions considerably, because when homes are weatherized and there's that much less energy consumed, of course, there's less CO2 in the atmosphere. It's also worth pointing out that 100% of the carbon-based fuels in Vermont are imported. So this is less fuel, less fuel imported, less money going out of state, which we think is very significant. And I guess the last thing to point out is that many people are familiar with the LIHEAP program, which was Low Income Heat Assistance Program. I guess that's what it is. And people on LIHEAP who are first in line to get weatherized. Their homes then become much more fuel efficient. They rely on LIHEAP much less, which provides that LIHEAP resources, which are finite, can then go to help other people who desperately need the same help. So that's it for H 439. It's a very significant bill, and we're glad it passed. Thank you.